good morning to those of us on this side of the Atlantic, and good afternoon to everyone over yonder. We're very happy for everyone to be here, whether you're taking this as an early bird offering or on your lunch break. It's always wonderful to be learning with you. This class is the original Parashah Shiur, Understanding the Haftorah as Intertext, with Dr. Rabbi Jon Kelsen. Far from a mere afterthought or drop-in, the institution of the Haftorah is actually of tremendous importance in the practice of communal Torah study. The pairing of selected passages from the Nevi'im with the weekly Torah reading constitutes a ritualized act of interpretation, among other functions. So, if you haven't guessed, in this class, we will be studying Haftorah with Dr. Rabbi Jon Kelsen, who recently returned to Drisha, now as our Chief Education Officer. Previously, he was the Dean at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah and Rosh Kollel of Drisha's Kollel, adjunct faculty at Pardes, and I'm sure many other things. Without further ado, Dr. Kelsen, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Noah. I'm really glad to be here with you all and excited to be back at Drisha. I'm learning with you all from Jerusalem. So this is my first time teaching from Jerusalem in quite a while. And it's really exciting and a real privilege. Thank you for those of you who joined me or joining us here in the afternoon, whether in Israel or Europe, or those of you who are joining us early in the morning, Eastern time in the States. What I would like to do is, in the course of this series, and we'll start today, is to explore the relationship of the weekly Haftorah to the Parashah, the Parashat HaShavua. And we're going to explore and describe that relationship today and going forward. Now, at the outset, I want to note that I'm building off of the teachings of scholars such as Professor Michael Fishbane, who authored a wonderful commentary, JPS Bible commentary to the Haftorah, and our own Rabbi David Silber, who first alerted me, I think, to the potential richness of exploring the interchange between the Parashah and the Haftorah years ago at a Shiur at Drisha, and has sort of inspired my thinking these many years. I hope as well to share my own suggestions and yours as well. On that note, I would love this to be as participatory as possible. Today will be more of an introduction to our, thank you, Noah, for putting the sources there, and I will also screen share for those who prefer to follow along that way. I would love for this to be as participatory as possible. So feel free to raise questions or comments, or your own ideas, as Noah said, in the chat, or follow along on Facebook. You can do it there. And also for those of you who have video on or who are sort of participating here as panelists or attendees, if I don't see you or something and you're saying you'd like to contribute, please just unmute and jump in. We'd love to make this into a Beit Midrash as much as possible. Technical note, Noah, I may have said this. Let me just remind people that we are basing ourselves on sort of the Eastern clocks of 7 a.m. Eastern New York time. That is today 1 p.m. in Israel, and then next week will be 2 p.m. God willing, when the clocks change. Before we move forward and share the sources, just for those who are here with us, I see a bunch of people who are in the Zoom itself. If you might just unmute, I'll go around and ask you to call you by name. You could share sort of where you are, your name, where you are. I'm just curious. I think we're curious as to where people are zooming in from, and why you came here today. And we'll go from there. So Elizabeth, and then is it Rumel? My apologies if I'm mispronouncing, but or Beth, I guess, if she just changed her name there. So Beth, and then Rumel. Beth, why don't you go first? Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm coming here from Ohio in the United States. I live on the land of the Hopewell, and later the foreign ancient peoples. And I've always loved the Haftorah, and one of my frustrations Jewishly is that we never have a cycle where we read all of the prophetic literature. And I wish we would. I've been in a number of college classes where my Christian classmates blow me out of the water with their knowledge. Nevi'im. They know everything. And obviously we're dealing again with the Haftorah that we normally would in our yearly cycle here. But I always like to dive in just because I don't feel like I know them well enough.
Terrific. Okay, thanks for joining. And by the way, you probably know, or maybe you might know about the 929 project, which is actually just beginning the book of Joshua. I think they're in chapter 7 or so, and might be a nice opportunity to go through all the prophets and writings. Thanks, Rumel. Nice to meet you.
Good morning. My name is Rumel Scott. I'm living in Wynwood, Pennsylvania. That's Lenai Lenape lands, right outside of Philadelphia. I'm a member of Adath Israel and Marion Station, where I'm the vice president of education, the Macomb program for children. And I've taken many courses at Drisha under Rabbi Berger and a few others.
Sure.
So I've been around, but been in hibernation since the pandemic. So,
right.
You know, I'm back, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And I really want to get into the Haftorah because I spend all my time on the Parashah of the week, but I know that's an integral part and I need to understand better the interconnection between the two. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, we'll try to do that. My family is from Wynwood and from Marion, so or not my immediate family, but myself. Nice to meet you.
Go Phillies.
Go Phillies. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Is it Sherry? Hi.
Yes. Good morning, John. I live in New York City, and my reason is pretty simple. I know very little about the Haftorah. I've been going to shul all my life, and as Rumel and Beth said, the focus is on the Parashah, and I just really want to get a better understanding of.
Terrific.
So thank you.
Thank you. That's great. I see others without their cameras on. I'll call out your name, but no pressure if you're unable to participate. But Sue, are you able to chime in? You are.
Hello, yeah, Sue. Where I am, it's 11 o'clock in the morning. I'm in a place called the United Kingdom, England, yes. Manchester. So I'm on the other side of the pond. I'm glad to be here. I'm here to gain knowledge. Like everyone said, what I do know is everything else but what we're here for today. I've been on courses before with Drisha. I must give a shout out. So it's not my first time attending Drisha, but yeah.
Love returning.
Oh, my name's Shana, but because my name's spelled Xana, people call me Xena Princess Warrior, so I put Sue on, but my name's actually Shana, but spelled with an X. But I suppose in this circle, people understand Shana. But
okay,
yeah.
I'll try to remember that in case you speak. But otherwise, forgive me if I slip into Sue. And we're so glad that you were able to join in late morning. This is an experimental time for us. Early morning before people go to work in New York time or Eastern Coast time, and then also mid-morning and for your time, afternoon for us. So we're thrilled to have you here. Ruth Shane. Okay, we come back to you if you like. You can unmute if you'd like. Aviva Davidson.
Good morning.
Hi.
I'm sorry I'm not on camera, but it's 7 o'clock here and I'm not quite ready to share my face with the world. I live in Brooklyn, but right now I'm speaking in Vermont, visiting my son.
Okay.
I am taking a class with Rabbi Silver on the patriarchs, and I think it's been a year, if I'm not mistaken. And I've taken several classes with Drisha, but mostly on the Torah. And I really want to study the other books of the Bible and of the classes offered now, this was the only one that was a little bit a taste of Nevi'im. So that's why I'm here.
Okay, terrific. Welcome. And maybe going. I know in the past we've certainly offered classes like in our cycle on other parts of the Tanakh, and perhaps we will do so again soon. So welcome.
Well, I especially so since is it the Director of Education? Is that your title?
In fact, Chief Education Officer, but it's
so I'm just going to put in I'm really eager to study Shmuel.
You've come to the right place. Rabbi Silver is, I dare say, the world's leading scholar in Shmuel, at least as far as I'm concerned. So
I know he wrote a book, but I don't know if he's offering a class. So that would be wonderful if he does.
Be in touch with us and with Noah and me, and we'll figure that out.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, who else do we have? Shira Krebs. Okay, welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, it took me a minute to get off mute. I'm Shira, I'm from Minneapolis, and I was one of the very first Drisha high school students way back when the program first started. And so this is actually the perfect time because it's right before minyan in the morning for me. And so I'm excited to start my day learning. Every so often I've started studying the Haftorah with my daughter because I'm thinking, you learn everything else, let's focus on this. So this might be a good way to get me back and give me material when I'm trying to learn with her. So thank you.
Wow. Well, we're kind of honored to have you here as one of the earliest Drisha high school program students. And if anybody knows potential high school age young woman who is eager to learn, we have applications are open for our program this coming summer. It's an amazing legacy program, many decades long at this point. So thank you, Shiur, for joining us. Martin Hershkowitz, nice to see you.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Where are you located geographically currently?
Rehovot.
Rehovot. I know you go back and forth. Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
So Martin and I obviously know each other from other contexts. It's lovely to have you here. I'm in Jerusalem, so just down the road from you, if you will. And we'll be in your neck of the woods for Shabbat. So not in Rehovot proper, but nearby.
Oh yeah, so, really? Where you got to be?
We'll talk more offline, but Beit Gamliel, which is in Moshav. Welcome.
Maybe we'll see you. Okay.
Thank you. MK, who is MK?
That's me. I am actually Martha Landau, and I am having trouble correcting my name and getting on the video.
Okay, no problem.
But I'm in Baltimore. I'm going to Jerusalem, God willing, on the 14th, 15th, and I'm really
of November.
Of November, yeah. I can't do it in October anymore.
I would love to meet you.
Okay, well, I'm going to be all over the place. What area do you live in?
So we'll talk again offline. I'm in Jerusalem.
What area?
Talbia, in Talbia.
Oh, okay. I'm going to be near there. I'll send an email.
We'll figure it out. Terrific. Looking forward. Did I miss anybody?
Oh, yeah. So now
Hi, Ruth. Yes,
I'm at the mute off. So I too am from Baltimore, and I'm sorry the camera's not going to be on for a while because it's a little early.
Not a problem.
So yes, so yesterday I was on this early in the morning with Rav Benny Lau, and so this is it's a little difficult this early in the morning to put a camera on, but I do want to hear about the Haftorah because the connections between the Parashah and the Haftorah are some of them are obvious and blatant, some of them are not. So I am very interested in the development of the whole thing. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. And Noah put a link in the chat for applications to potentially to the high school program. We also have a middle school program for middle school girls. So highly recommended. And she also posted the sources, but I'm going to screen, if you want to open it, via the PDF in the chat, I'm going to screen share as well. So without further ado, and today is an introduction. to what we're going to be doing. Next week, we will focus on the Parashah Hashavua and the Haftorah Hashavua proper. Okay, so let's, without further ado, jump in here, and I will share my screen. 1 second. Okay, here we go. Can everybody see that? Everybody good? Noah, we good? Okay, people can see it. Okay, so let's learn together. An institution of the Haftorah. So the Haftorah, and by the way, in terms of translation, normally today I wasn't able to put everything into translation, but I'll translate that which requires translation. And going forward, we'll basically be using the biblical text primarily, and translations will be readily available. But same thing, I'm saying that you don't I don't translate something which you would like to have translated. Please let me know. So the notion of a Haftorah. We'll get to the etymology of that word in a moment, but the notion of a Haftorah, of this reading, appears already in the Mishnah. So the Mishnah, let's assume, is redacted around 200 CE. So somewhere by that point, land of Israel, by that point, the Tannaitic literature knows of the phenomenon, the institution of the Haftorah. And is already describing its parameters, or working out, maybe I should say, its parameters, the rules governing the recitation of the Haftorah. And I use the recitation advisedly because we find early discussion of the Haftorah in Masechet Megillah. You see over here, this is from the 4th chapter of the Mishnah on Masechet Megillah. Masechet Megillah, in that section of the tractate, is discussing ritual recitations like Kriyat HaTorah, the reading of the Torah. And in that context, and in describing, as well as, of course, reading of the Megillah. So in that context, the Mishnah talks about the rules governing reciting the Megillah and Kriyat Torah and the Haftarah. So, for example, Parak Daled, Mishnah Aleph, Akore et HaMegillah Omed v'Yoshev. One who recites the Megillah can be standing or seated. I'll skip ahead. B'Sheni u'B'Chamishi u'B'Shabbat. On Mondays and Thursdays and Shabbat at Mincha Korin Shlosha, we recite, but it means sort of technically recite in public. Kriyat Torah, we read the Torah with 3 aliyot. This is our practice today as well. Ein pochatin ve'ein mosipin aleihen, no fewer and no more, unlike on Shabbat, for example, when you can have more. We have no less than 3 and no more than 3. Ve'ein maftirin b'navi. Here's a mention where in the negative, ein maftirin b'navi, but we are not maftir. We do not recite a Haftorah from the prophets. Interestingly, we'll see that there was a custom in the Gaonic era, cited by Rashi before the Gaonic era, to recite some form of Haftorah, to study prophets, especially Isaiah, Yeshaya, on Shabbat afternoons. And that'll become relevant in just a moment, or we'll hear sort of an echo of that, or foreshadowing of that in just a moment when we get to some of the New Testament sources. But the Ein Maftirin Minavi. So you see it sort of mentioned Derech Agav, by the way, the phenomenon of being Maftirin Navi. Or in Mishnah Bet, it talks about days like Rosh Chodesh or Chol HaMoed, the new month, or the intermediary days of holidays, where we recite we have 4 aliyot to the Torah, again, Ein Maftirin Ben Navi, etc. More interestingly for our point here is, let's say, Mishnah Gimel. This is actually a well-known Mishnah because it talks about the mitzvot, or the institutions, which require 10, a minyan, in order to fulfill them. So, for example, Ein Parson Tashema, a sort of type of recitation of the Shema with blessings. Ein Ovrim Lefnei Teva, having a Shliach Tzibor, something like Tefillah B'Tzibor, like reciting the Amidah with Kedusha. Ein Nosen et Kapehem, Ein Korban B'Torah, reciting the Torah, priestly blessing. Ve'ein Maftirin B'Navi, and we don't are Maftir B'Navi. We only are Maftir B'Navi with 10. Pachot Me'asara, we do not recite the Haftorah. So you see it listed here as a sort of formal phenomenon. Formal, I say A, because Mishnah recognizes it as not just some sort of, sidebar custom, but actually something along the lines of Kriyat Torah and the priestly blessing. And it requires 10, which, bespeaks it as what we call davar shebekdusha, but it bespeaks sort of a level of importance, I'd say, and an insistence that it be a public, formal recitation. I'll skip to Mishnah 5 just for another taste. Hamaftir ben Navi, it says in the Mishnah, the one who is maftir in the Navi, the one who is maftir in the prophets, who pares al Shema, that very same person should be pares al Shema, should do the sort of like ritualized recitation of Shema. Who over lefnei teva, he should lead the prayers, etc. Im haya katkan, if this person who recited the Navi was a minor. So you see that a minor apparently could read the Haftorah according to this text. Vivo rabo obrin al yado. Then his father or teacher would take his place for leading the prayers. Now this is an interesting text, Hamaftir ben Navi hu pares al Shema, because it indicates one of two things. Either it indicates that one who is maftir ben Navi should do these other things because being maftir Navi was so important. Or, as is more commonly interpreted, at least in my experience, Hamaftir ben Navi, because it was not potentially not taken as seriously, they wanted to sort of beef up the import, the honor of the experience, and therefore one who was Maftir ben Navi was also sort of given the honor of doing these other things as well, so that it not be sort of a slight to one receiving who has to be Maftir ben Navi. My point actually from these Mishnayot is less about all the details that we just mentioned, but rather the fact that by the time you get to the Mishnah, it's clear that being Maftir ben Navi is a thing. We don't know as much about why it's a thing, why it was instituted, or its nature. We don't know that much from these texts about what it looked like to be Maftir ben Navi. A little bit, but not that much. But it's clearly a thing. What's more, I think, a richer text actually for us is our two sources from Christian scripture from the New Testament. And here we have the following. Luke chapter 4, in the Gospel of Luke, speaks of Jesus coming to Nazareth, where he'd been brought up. And listen to this. As his custom was, he went into the synagogue on Shabbat, on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. I don't know if this was the morning or the afternoon, although if it was the afternoon, it's interesting because he's about to recite from the book of Isaiah, and we mentioned the Jewish custom, which is no longer commonly practiced, if at all, to recite some sort of Haftorah from Isaiah, or to at least to read from Isaiah on Shabbat afternoons. In any event, Jesus goes to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, and he reads a selection from the book of Isaiah. The Spirit of the Lord, this was just from a translation, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach to the poor, etc., to proclaim the year of the Lord. Then he closed the book and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. Just note for a second what's happening here. He goes into synagogue and he's handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. Might this indicate that already at the time of the writing of Luke, we know, if not earlier, we see here evidence of the practice of reciting some form of a ritual, a public reading of a selection from the prophets and the Nevi'im, especially Yeshaya. Yeshaya, by the way, is a disproportionately recruited prophet for the Haftorah, right? It's disproportionate number of Haftorah come from Yeshaya, usually the later chapters, the chapters of consolation. So perhaps this is an indication of an early practice of reciting what we would call a Haftorah. Now, by the way, when we think of a Haftorah today and the Haftorah of the week, when you say that use the word the, you're implying that there is a the, actually stating it, right? There is a Haftorah for the week. The truth is there are many customs as to which Haftorah is recited, which and attached to which Parashah. Today, there's many customs among the different, these are Amim and denominations, that's to say, Ashkenaz, Sfarad, Edotam Mizrach, Yemenite, et cetera, et cetera. Even within, let's say, Ashkenaz, there are also differences before things are getting a bit more standardized. So for the purposes of this series, I'm going to focus on what has become the standardized Ashkenazic Haftorah per week, but that's only because it's the one that I'm most familiar with. Maybe we'll have opportunity to compare and contrast a bit with others. But here, in any event, it's unclear, right? And scholars actually are sort of debate this. It's unclear based on this text whether there was a set selection per week. That's to say, he's handed the book of Isaiah and he's supposed to read the following selection from Isaiah. So there's a known Haftorah for that week. Or if the idea is he's handed the book of prophet Isaiah, because that's the one that they are often reciting from, but he has the choice. He has the choice of which Haftorah sort of strikes his fancy or his spirit, if you will. That is also an important point, I think, not only because of understanding this text. Again, it's not clear from this text, but that's important also because the notion of a Haftorah per week, which is fixed communally, is also not clear, right? Perhaps it was the case, and there are sort of remnants of this to this day, perhaps there was the case that the person who recited Haftorah was called up to be, for the maftir, had discretion as to which Haftorah to recite, as to say, which portion of the prophets was speaking to that person that week and they wanted to recite, or maybe go community by community, or maybe it depended on the events in that community. We'll come to this later on. But I just wanted to sort of raise that point already here, because potentially here you see the roots of that tradition, at least, where he's handed the book of Isaiah, but he can sort of choose what he wants to read. Okay. What I want to point out here is after he recites, what I'm highlighting here, right? After he recites part of the prophets and the Nevi'im, he closes the book. He gave it back to the attendant and sat down. And the eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him, and he began to say to them, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." And the gospel goes on, ... So he begins to teach, right? And he begins to teach in reference, or to, maybe teaches the wrong word, he gives in a sense what we would call a drasha. He is doresh scripture. He interprets it in the sense of fulfillment, right? That today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. It is being fulfilled. Maybe he's referring to himself in this context, etc. So he is teaching about it. Now, Fishbane already points out, I've seen this elsewhere, and I think this is really important. If there's one thing that you take away from today, this is what I wanted to highlight. Here's the major point that I wanted to make. You have here, and you see it's also in Acts, right, with Paul, but you have already in this text, I think a picture of, which would be familiar to any student of Torah, of Chazal, any student of the Beit Midrash, a picture of early proto-Talmud Torah study. And what I mean by that is, assuming that they had also read, of course, Torah that day, but you have here two levels. One, the public study of a given text, and then two, analysis, interpretation, midrash on that text. And I would say all the more so, this is level 2, this is really important, all the more so when you have the way that we do it, or maybe that's what was already here, but certainly you have it in the Mishnah, where the reading of the Haftorah, the Navi, comes after, is juxtaposed with the reading of the Torah itself, the Torah. In which case, what you have are two texts: the Torah text, the Parashah, and the Haftorah text, juxtaposed one after the other to generate meaning by putting them together. And then that's followed by commentary. Call it a drasha, if you will. It's by commentary, interpretation, investigation, drisha v'chakira. This is a utterly familiar model of learning. It's familiar from Midrash, for example, where you often will find Tanaitic Midrash, where you'll find them say, here is text 1, let's say verse 1, and here is another verse, text 2, put them in dialogue with one another, and out of that dialogue, sometimes apparent contradiction, but creative tension, we will generate an interpretation, generate meaning. This is actually analogous, I think, to what some have argued what constituted proto-sugyot, proto-pieces of Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is full of rich discursive layers, but at the earliest level, maybe you find this more in the Yerushalmi, it's been argued that Talmud basically was the earliest level, juxtaposition of two texts, let's say a Mishnah and a Breita if you study Talmud, right? Two Tanaitic texts, which are related to one another in one form or another. And by juxtaposing those two, you generate some sort of meaning, an interpretation, maybe a memra, an early Amoraic statement, maybe other, to harmonize, differentiate, what have you. That would be the proto-sugya, an early sugya. So this is actually very similar. And I'm sort of highlighting this for two reasons. One is that, maybe we take it for granted if you're sort of an heir to the rabbinic method of learning, right? It's sort of the bread and butter of how we learn, which is, you take one text, you take another text, you put them together, you notice similarities, you notice differences, right? It's so obvious and so fundamental that we sometimes, I think, overlook that which is not to be taken for granted about it. Because you can imagine a mode of learning, which is other faith traditions have this, for example, where what you do basically is you have one text and you encounter one text and then you kind of sit with it and you see how it moves you and you see what it brings up for you, etc. And that's where the meaning comes from. But the notion that, I shared with you today, this source sheet with all these different texts put into conversation with each other, right? Or the Gemara itself, the Talmud is full of that. That's perhaps the basis of the Talmud, is putting two texts together and noticing what happens and then interpreting. That is a very rabbinic way of learning. It's not the only way of learning, but it's a very rabbinic way of learning. And you see that already here. The second point, though, is that if this model is accurate, if this schema is accurate in describing, what's happening with the Haftorah, then what we discover, and I put this in the title of the series, Haftorah as Intertext, that the Haftorah is no mere throwaway. It's no little, drop-in add-on. While we're reading Torah, let's find something related, plop in an extra text. No way. The Haftorah is actually, I would argue, is functioning as an intertext with the Parashah, okay? And its institution effects a ritualized communal act of Talmud Torah in the classic rabbinic sense. We have the Parashah, that's one text. Okay, it's a rich text, but that's one text. Text 2, the Katuv Hasheni, if you will, is the Haftorah. And then the idea, I'm trying to argue, the idea is that out of that encounter between these two texts, the text and the intertext, or the countertext, you generate meaning. The two dialogue, perhaps the Haftorah amplifies the Parashah, perhaps it nuances the Haftorah at other moments, perhaps it offers a contrast to the Parashah. It's a much richer institution and ritual than merely locating somewhere in the prophets where it happens to have a similar turn of phrase or vague thematic connection to the Parashah and instituting it and deciding to read it as well, right? And everyone can talk in shul while it's being read if they bother to stay in the room. Okay, no, actually, what we're seeing in synagogue, what we're seeing is after the morning prayers, after Shacharit, is public Talmud Torah. And Talmud Torah in the Chazali sense of multivocal, multi-textual, leveraging intertext for the creation of meaning. And the drasha, by the way, I'm not personally a fan, I don't know about you guys, of long speeches and sermons in shul, but the notion of putting the text together and then opening a discourse, learning, right? Which we see in this text already in Luke, for example, of all places, is also part of that Beit Midrash experience, which we make part of our experience at synagogue on special days. Okay, so that is the main claim that I want to put out here, and I sort of belabor the point because the Haftorah gets short shrift, and actually I think it's extremely important. We come to realize that institutional Haftorah is an extremely important moment in the history of public Jewish ritual, and I'd say public Jewish learning. Okay, it makes the Beit Knesset into a Beit Midrash in a very serious way. Okay, let me pause there for one moment. Any comments or thoughts or questions, anything to bring up for you?
John, can I just? Yeah. So Malka Simkovich has been teaching a lot during the pandemic on Zoom.
Great.
And so she always makes a point of saying that the Beit Midrash originally was not a place of tefillah. It was just the Beit Midrash, but not tefillah. But here we see the combination, or like the coming together of Beit Midrash and Beit Knesset, like praying and the learning are coming together, which I just find that very interesting to see how that evolved, or how it went from only Beit Midrash learning only, some place for tefillah is a separate place, and now it seems like they're coming together in a very firmly set way.
Yeah, I would say that there are passages in the Talmud about praying or not praying in the Beit Midrash, but on the other hand, the flip side, that the Beit Knesset being a place of coming together, Knesset, and of learning, I think is learning in some sort of is very early. Okay, so moving along here. I'm not going to go through all the sources on the source sheet, but I'm happy to talk to anybody about them afterwards or another time. But I do want to just note that this is a bit of a note that the origins of Haftorah and its very etymology. What does the word Haftorah mean? Is lost a bit in history, right? Where did it really come from? I mean, maybe it just emerged organically over time through just common practice and became formalized. But I will want to share a couple origin stories here, which I think are instructive. So the Abu Draham, this is David ben Yosef Abu Draham, Spain, 13th century. So he notes, right, in his description of what Shacharit morning looks like at synagogue, that after we close the Sefer Torah, we roll the Sefer Torah scroll, we recite the Haftorah, and it has to be Mi'inyan Parshat Hayom, which we'll come to later. It has to be, related to the theme, or has to somehow be connected to, I'd say, the topic of the Parashah. And then he says, "But lama mafshir b'nevi'im? Why do we read a Navi at all? Why do we do this Haftorah? Because Lefisha Gazril Yisrael Shelo Yikru B'Torah. Because there was once decreed against Israel that, and other sources talk about this being at the time of the Greeks, like Antiochus from the Hanukkah story, they were decreed against Israel, Shelo Yikru B'Torah, that they could not recite Torah. They could not do Kriyat Torah. And therefore, he says, they instituted the Haftorah, which was meant to basically take the place of the Kriyat Torah. So he's imagining a time, or describing a time when there's no Kriyat Torah, and the Haftorah is meant to somehow take its place. Right? And if it's meant to take its place, you can see why it had to be made in Yan Parshat Hayom, because it's meant to sort of substitute it. This is his story. And he says, actually, interestingly, that's why it's called Haftorah. Lefisha Hayu Niftarin Ba Mikrat Torah. Because by doing so, by reciting the Haftorah, they were exempted from, as it were, they fulfilled their obligation of reciting Kriyat Torah without actually reciting, anything from the Torah itself, but by reciting a substitute. So Haftorah milashon, Pturin, right, exempt. He can't say that it comes from what other people are going to say, which comes from the language of, ein maftirin after hapesach afikomen, is to say that it's that which comes after the reading of the Torah, because in his origin story there is no reading of the Torah, right? So it has to have a different, interesting etymology. Now, Rabbeinu Tam katav tam acher. Rabbeinu Tam had a different understanding, right? The Rashi's grandson, the early, very important Tosafist. He says, why is it called Haftorah? And he says, because, the Talmud says, once a Sefer Torah is opened, that is to say, for reading, right, for Kriyas Torah, one is forbidden from speaking, even in Dvar Halacha, even about Halacha. You can't, once the Torah is being read. And then after Kriyas Torah, then they could open their mouths, right, and begin to speak. Meaning patuach. So Rabbeinu Tam says, actually, Haftorah, that etymologically derives from the term like peter, right, the opening of the womb, right, or yaftiru b'safa, they open their mouths. Patuach, because then you could begin to speak. I don't know if what he meant, Rabbeinu Tam, was you could begin to speak, casual speech, or what I think he means is you could speak other words, as to say the words of the Haftorah. Right, so Haftorah from the language of beginning to speak. What's interesting to me about this, in our context of our discussion today, is that the language, this idea of beginning to speak, perhaps what he's getting at is that Haftorah is the beginning of the learning, right? That after you recite Kriyat Torah, you're not supposed to be doing other learning, like talking about Dvar Halacha. But once the Kriyat Torah is over and you turn to the Haftorah, now you can begin to speak. Now you can begin to talk. Now it becomes, if you will, a Beit Midrash. And we begin becoming a Beit Midrash by reciting Haftorah and then some sort of teaching, right? A drasha or otherwise. And finally, others say that it comes from the language of Ein Maftirim Lachar Pesach Afikomen, meaning the thing which is like at the end, right? Klomar achar shekaru haftorah nistalku mitfilat yotzer or matchil mitfilas musaf. That once you recite the Haftorah, you finish basically shacharit, including Kriyat Torah, and you begin musaf. So 3 different etymologies for the term Haftorah, and they might indicate different things, different understandings of the relationship between the Haftorah and the Kriyat Torah. Right? Is it the substitute for Kriyat Torah initially? Is it the thing which sort of finishes Kriyat Torah or finishes Shacharit and Kriyat Torah, etc.? There are other origin stories. For example, in the Shibbolei Haleket, the medieval Shibbolei Haleket, or I have over here, Shibbolei Haleket is Zedekiah ben Abraham of Rome, 13th century, and he has the story. Matzat B'Shem Rabbeinu Shlomo, I assume he means Rashi, of an early custom that the people would, or at least the righteous would, after tefillah, after davening, they would stay and learn. Mevi'in Sfarim B'Korin, they would read Torah, Navi, Mishnah, Talmud, etc. And what happened is people got busy and they weren't able to really do so anymore. And they had to go to work, and other pressures of life made it not possible to sit for so many hours in the synagogue for most people. So what we did was we made parts of the tefillah conclusion, we incorporated selections from, for example, the prophets, like the Nuval Etzion Goel and Vani Zot Briti, which is sort of a way of reciting some parts of the prophets at the end of prayers without having to have a whole, what we call Seder Limud, having to sit down and have time to really, recite them at length because people didn't have time. What's interesting is that he claims that B'Shabbat v'Yom Tov, on the Sabbath and on Yom Tov, when people are not working, sheish bo bitul melachah la'am, and they have time to learn, so then we recite the Haftorah. So the Shibbolei Haleket's understanding, the Haftorah, as opposed to understanding it as sort of as a substitution for the forbidden recitation of the Torah, of Kriyat Torah, he claims that what he's citing is a tradition which claims that the Haftorah is actually a remnant of daily learning, of daily Navi study, which people only had time for really on Shabbat and Yom Tov. So two different understandings of why we would recite the Haftorah. There are also Torah scholars who have claimed or speculated that the Haftorah is also recited in order to sort of counter the voice of sectarians who deny the canonical status of the prophets, and that would, jibe well with the Nusach HaBrachot, which speaks of, God choosing Nevi'im Emet Vatzedek, righteous and true prophets, etc., sort of making clear that this tradition holds by the veracity of the prophets, etc. I'm going to skip ahead here. I'll just say that all the sources which are on your source sheets and in the following sections, I was going to, because of time, I'll be short, but you should know that there's a whole debate as to the relationship of the Haftorah to Kriyat Torah, beyond what we said so far, with regards to it being potentially a substitute for forbidden Kriyat Torah during the time. The Haftorah, there are different practices. There are those who recite it, for example, from a book of Haftorot, but there are other communities where they insist that it be recited from a cloth, from parchment. Right? And in part, we can understand that debate, those different practices, as different understandings of the nature of how formal institutional Haftorah is, its relationship to Kriyat Torah, perhaps more broadly, its function. Is it more of a ritual recitation, or is it like a Megillah or Kriyat Torah, or is it some sort of learning? Right. Also, there are questions as to who may recite the Haftorah. Can even a minor recite the Haftorah? There's also this whole excursus here, which we're going to skip for now, but I'm happy to talk to anybody about it later. There's a whole debate of as to whether the maftir's aliyah counts towards the 7 aliyah quota. What I mean by that is on Shabbat, for example, there's a 7 aliyah quota. Does the one who recites the Haftorah, called the maftir, traditionally first recites a few verses of Torah. And the way that the practice that you probably know of is, where this was hotly debated, is that the maftir recites the final verses of the aliyah of the 7th person. Right? So they'll go back and they'll reread on behalf of the maftir, the final verses of the seventh aliyah. But which means there already were 7. But there was a whole debate as to whether or not the maftir's aliyah could count towards the 7 aliyah quota, right? And also as to whether the maftir should recite their own verses, right? So all of that is that whole discussion hinges on the question of the relationship between the Haftorah and the maftir institution to that of Kriyat Torah. You should know that there is a debate, medieval debate, as to whether or not that reciting the Haftorah is even a formal institution, right? A formal, it's a formal, I guess, takana, enactment, or custom of sorts, right? So this is often cited as a debate between the Machriya, the Reed Hazaken, who seems to indicate that it is a formal part of the Kriyat Torah institution. It's an extension, not only reciting the 5 books of Moses, but also parts of the prophets. Versus, on the other hand, the opinion of the Tashbetz, Shimon ben Semach Turan, in 14th, 15th century Spain. And he clearly says that Kriyat HaTorah, here I'm highlighting it on the screen, Eino ela lechavod hanevim ba'alma. It's just instituted as an honor to the prophets, to honor the prophets, to give them pride of some sort of place in recitation. But there's not a formal takana enactment like the Torah. Okay. So what I'll say in moving on here, I'll say as follows. On the one hand, in the Tosefta and in the Mishnah and in the Tosefta and in early text in the Bavli, Brightot, we do find that on specific days of the year, special days of the year, there were specific haftarot assigned. So, for example, Rosh Chodesh Adar, when they recite Parshat Shekalim, a special, portion from Parshat Ki Tisa about the collections for the temple, you are maftirin in a parallel text I think this is from the book of Kings. Okay. So for specific days, there was a specific Haftorah, and then there's a Breita which expands upon that list, not for every Shabbat, but for special days of the year. Right. Indeed, I'm just skipping ahead. The Kesef Mishnah, indeed, Rabbi Yosef Karo remarks in one place that it appears to him, based on some earlier text, Nira shelo hayta lahem ba'oto zman haftarot k'vot k'moinu hayom. He says, it looks to me like that when I read the Talmud, it sounds to me like they didn't have any fixed haftarot. Ela kol echad haya maftir inyan sheher nira lo shehu metaches laparsha. But rather, each person would simply recite that which appeared to him as related to the parsha. It was the reader's discretion. He says, indeed, today there's different customs in different communities as to what Haftorah recite at any given week, as we said earlier. So it might have been the case that there were no, or at least less, standardized fixed Haftorah per parsha. Even less than today, when there's different communities have different Haftorah, but at least they're fixed within each community. Perhaps it was more of the reader's discretion earlier on. That is possible. And I'll just note some curious, not curious, but sort of interesting customs, which, for example, in the Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah, or Moshe Israelis, notes the custom that in some places, nohagin lahaftir b'chatuna sosasis, that in some communities, when there is a wedding in that community coming up, maybe there's a bride and groom or in the synagogue that Shabbat, that we recite the specific Haftorah in that community, which has mentioned a couple of times of God's return being as joyous as that of a chatan, of a groom, etc. That's actually very interesting, because you would find indication in that custom of Haftorah not only being related to the parsha, but also being related to the sort of calendrical occurrences of holidays, but also to community-specific occurrences, right? So if there's a wedding in your community, then you recite the specific Haftorah, right? Or even more interestingly, to my mind, is a tradition that Abraham cites from Rav Saadia Gaon in the Gaonic period, which is over here, which says that when, for example, Shabbat sheyebo hesped lechacham maftirim parsha gala kavod Yisrael. That if you're in a place where a sage died in your community, you recite a specific Haftorah. And he says, I actually found, Abraham says, that when the Maimonides passed away in this community, nichnasu hakahal b'beit knesset, that when Maimonides dies, his community, they went to synagogue that Shabbat, I guess, and they recited brachot v'klalot. They recited from Devarim, or maybe from some other, from Leviticus, the blessings and curses, and they have tiru b'navi Moshe avdimi, and they were maftir. They chose Haftorah of Moshe, my servant has died, the beginning of Joshua. Indeed, there's another tradition that when Rav Shrera Gaon passed away, on that Shabbat they read a Haftorah about God appointing a successor to Moshe. and they recited the Haftorah of about David dying. Right, David about being to die and appointed a successor. And instead of it saying Shlomo Yesheva Kisei David, instead of reciting and Solomon shall sit on David's throne, they read V'hai Yesheva Kisei Shrira Aviv. That High Gaon, he became High Gaon. High shall sit on the throne of his father Shrira. So they actually, manipulated the text of the Haftorah to apply it directly to their own experience. So you see these different. Here I'm going to stop the screen share. You see these different traditions. As to the standardization of the Haftorah on the one hand, which is basically what we're used to today when we speak of the Haftorah, as opposed to, potentially in an earlier period, the Haftorah being kind of ad hoc. Each community or maybe each reader could decide based on his reading of the Parashah, or maybe based on what was happening in the community, if not calendrically, what Haftorah, what text to cite, which I think is really interesting, and you still have echoes of that to this day. This leads us to, and do we stop at the hour mark? Is this how it's billed?
You have time for questions and comments, so usually 15 minutes after is our cutoff. Oh,
terrific. So what I want to say is, I think what I'll do is I will leave time to talk a little bit with everybody, questions and thoughts and comments. But what I want to say is that this leads us into thinking about, now that we do have the institution of Haftorah, and there is sort of standardized Haftorah, which means somehow these communities have decided this given text is meant to be put into dialogue with this given Parashah, for example. That leads us to ask and understand and explore together these coming weeks, what is the relationship precisely of the Haftorah to a given Parashah? And I just want to note briefly, and I think what I'll do is I'll circle back this in greater depth next week, is that there can be different types of relationships, right, between a Haftorah and a Parashah. Sometimes it looks like it's merely lexical, right, or terminological, meaning it looks like, there's like a phrase here which sounds like something in the Parashah, so we put it together. Like, for example, last week, Parashat Noach, so the Haftorah, which is from Isaiah, let's pull it up over here, the Haftorah from Isaiah 54, which is recited in other contexts, mentions that God says, "I'll never destroy you again, for this is to me like the waters of Noah, Kimei Noach Zotli," okay, etc. So right there's an explicit connection. I mean, I would argue, and people have argued that there's more to it than that, but sometimes it looks like it's merely lexical. On the other hand, others look like they're topical. Okay, so we think about the Haftorah for Bereshit, and again in the standard Ashkenazic Haftorah from Isaiah 42, the Haftorah for Parashah Bereshit begins even. Ko Amar Ha'el Adonai, so says God the Lord, who creates Borei HaShamayim V'notehem, who creates the heavens and stretches them out, who spreads out the earth and brings what it brings forth, etc., who gives breath to the people upon it. There it seems like it's a topical connection. God is creator, right? And we could go on. Or next week, Parashat Vayera, which is sort of a subset of topical foci, a sort of typological association, right? Rabbi Dr speaks of type scenes, right, where you have the Bible and talks. We'll have multiple narratives, all partaking of a given type scene, right, of a maiden going to a well and some sort of shidduch happening as a result. Well, next week, Parashat Vayera, which also includes the story of the angels visiting Abraham and Sarai, and also the story of the Akedah, is juxtaposed by the Haftorah with portions of the Book of Kings, where you have common features or ingredients of these type scenes, such as a prophet and guests offering of food, the death of a beloved child, right? These are the stories of Elisha, the prophet, right? We'll get to that next week if you come back. Death of a beloved child, and actually perhaps his resurrection. Okay, more on that. More on that next week. But all I want to end with the following, and we'll come back to this next week. I think at the beginning is that I think there's more than meets the eye. I'll give you one example of more than meets the eye, and this is actually from, I saw this in Fishbane and others. I just read to you from Isaiah, where Isaiah 42, where God is described as Koamar, Ha'el Adonai, Borei Shamayim, what is it? Borei HaShamayim V'notehem, who creates the heavens and stretches them out, etc. Right there's something very important that's happening, because it talks about God as Borei, Osei, Yotzer, God creates and fashions and makes. These are the same terms deployed in the beginning of Genesis, in part Bereshit Parak Aleph, but there it's Bereshit bara Elohim, right? Vayas Elohim, right? Yatsar. These are perfect verbs, as to say that they are past tense. We would call it past tense. And in Isaiah, it is in what we call present tense, right? Imperfect verbs. Which means that in Isaiah, if you take that distinction seriously, Isaiah is claiming that God is not only the creator past tense, the one who's created, but God, which you might have understood from the beginning of Genesis, right? God creates this perfect world by Yarlim Kitov, all is good. God creates, divides, speaks, sanctifies even the Sabbath, and then based on that chapter, that's it. Actually, God is actively involved in history. Not only the God of creation, but the God of history. God is actively intervening, which is a notion of God intervening and continuously creating. We know from our liturgy, and it's an entirely different worldview with very different ramifications. Second point that Fishbane makes, which is very, very important, is that in this Haftorah, God speaks of, the prophet speaks of illuminating the eyes of the blind. That those who are blind, even like his servants, right, should be given sight, and their eyes should be opened. And here we could note that light in the beginning of Genesis seems rather literal, right? The Me'orot, the luminaries give light, the sun and the moon. There is some light distinguished from darkness in the beginning days of creation, even prior to the creation of the luminaries. But here in Isaiah, light takes on a different resonance, a different meaning. Here, light is understood in the opening of the eyes to see, is understood, if you will, in a moral, spiritual sense. So it's in conversation already with the beginning of Bereshit in a deep way. And in conclusion, I'll say one more thing of my own, which is that as I read that Haftorah from Bereshit, what I see here is kind of a prologue to the entire book of Genesis in a way, because here in Isaiah 42, we have God creating the world, of course, Borei Shamayim V'notehem, and then God says in verse 7 there that God opens the eyes of the blind, as I said, and takes out prisoners from confinement, those who sit in the kelah, the dungeon or the prison, those who are sitting in the dark, takes them out from there. And to my mind, I hear from that echoes of Noah being taken out of the ark, out of confinement, and being brought forth. And then the prophet continues and shifts to speaking about covenant, a brit, and the narrow particularistic focus of the forefathers. He speaks about the covenant he has made. He talks about creating Jacob, forming Israel, etc. So shifting into the patriarchal narratives, if you will, from chapter 12 and on, if I remember correctly, or 11, 12 on in Genesis, and not only notes the shift, right, from Genesis meaning the beginning of the book of Genesis, to Noah, to the story of the forefathers and the patriarchs and the foremothers, but also speaks of creating the forefathers, Baracha Yaakov, Yotzrech Israel, uses creation language in regards and relationship to Jacob, to Israel, and invites one to consider, therefore, the relationship of the beginning of the book to the middle of the book and to the end of the book meaning the book of Genesis. There's much more to say about that, but I think it's just a little taste, I hope, a little taste of my claim that the Haftorah is put into juxtaposition and conversation with the Parashah, with the Torah, and whatever the origins of it, historically, the effective meaning of the Haftorah is as an intertext with Kriyat Torah. It is the Katuv Hasheni. It is the Charuta, if you will, of the Parshat HaShavua. And by being in the Beit Knesset, we're invited into a sort of ritualized and really rich communal experience of rabbinic style Talmud Torah. One text, another text, notice commonalities, differences, nuances, embellishments, divergences, machloket, and we're invited to bring our voice into that, right? It's an experience of Talmud Torah. It's potentially a lot more than just sort of, a similar phrase, and it's certainly a lot more than, a throwaway extra reading designed to keep you stuck in shul even longer. It's actually just the contrary, a remarkably important, I would claim, experience of communal Talmud Torah. That is the spirit in which we will encounter it over the coming weeks. So I hope to see you back next week. I'll pause here for any closing comment, but I hope to see you back here next week so we can begin in earnest learning Haftorah by Haftorah. Okay, thank you. Comments, questions, anything?
There is one question in the chat.
Yeah.
At the beginning, there was reference to a book or commentary. Could we repeat what that book or commentary was?
May. So there's actually a bunch of, there are many fewer commentaries on the Haftorah than there are on the Parashah. I guess partly we're here to rectify that that gap. But I mentioned Michael Fishbane's JPS Bible commentary Haftorah. I borrowed it here from a local library here. Excellent resource. That's one thing if you want a book to read. There's a few others. I actually had not been able to get a hold of a hard copy yet, but apparently Rav Mendel Hirsch, who was a son of Samson Raphael Hirsch of Frankfurt, 19th Frankfurt, he apparently wrote a commentary on Haftorah, and one of the things he tried to do was exactly this, was to investigate the relationship of the Haftorah to the Parsha in different ways, sometimes noting contrast actually, and not just parallels. So those are two things to keep your eye open for.
Jon, I love the idea of what you just said, that the Haftorah is the Havruta partner to the Torah. Nice.
Thank you. Okay, everybody. So jkelsen@drisha.org, JKELSEN, if you want to reach out, you know how to find me. And I'm so glad to have learned with you today, and I hope to see you all next week.
So I have my little closing spiel as usual. So of course, thank you, Dr. Kelsen, for a wonderful class, and to all of you, those who woke up early to join us, and those who are taking time out of their day to learn with us and be part of our learning community. This has been a nice start to the day for me, and I hope same for the rest of you who are starting your day. If it's just a part out of your day, I hope that the rest of your day goes well.